What is going on, everybody? If you don't know, now you do know. You're officially tuned in to a very special edition of the HFWB podcast series. This is your host, Clifton Pope, and with me today, I have a very special gentleman who is an outright leader in his own right, and his passion for what he does is inspiring to everybody within the community, and it's something that I feel like is necessary to be brought to the HFWB podcast series today. This gentleman here I'm about to bring on, he basically worked his way up literally from the ground up to, of course, be in the position to where he can help preserve and promote Hispanic culture, which is very important, especially here in Corpus Christi, Texas, and the South Texas region where I'm currently located, and for those who are listening to the podcast series today. With that being said, he's basically the president of ICH, which is Instituto de Cultura Hispanica de Corpus Christi, and he's also the director of the mental health services here located in Nueces County. If you have no idea who I'm talking about at this exact moment, please welcome Dr. Xavier Gonzalez to the HFWB podcast series. Dr. Gonzalez, thank you so much for your time, for being on the podcast today.
No, Clifton, thank you, and I appreciate you reaching out and want to take the time to hear what I have to say.
No, of course. It's like we just talked about a second ago, Dr. Gonzalez. Everybody has a story to tell because everybody has went through something or overcome some obstacle to basically get to where they're at currently. And for those who are actually listening to this podcast episode today and are wondering who is Dr. Xavier Gonzalez and what is the background story of where you come from, how could you best explain that?
Well, I guess I'll start off then. I am from Corpus Christi, so I grew up here, was born and raised here, and so this has been home. This is what I've known for, I would say, the majority of my life. Mm-hmm. That's where everything started off for me is here. As far as going from being born and raised here and then moving on to where I'm at now and the position I'm in, it's not a straight shot, as you kind of put it. It's taken a lot of twists and turns along the way, and I've bounced around quite a bit over the time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and overall, and it's definitely have led you to the journey that you're on, because I remember when we first met, we met at an art show. For those who are wondering how me and Dr. Gonzalez met, we met at an art show through a mutual friend. Her name is Mirza Mirli. She basically connected us to, and from there we had a very great conversation. We kind of share kind of the same ideals and beliefs as far as what it means to represent the community the right way and stuff like that. And most importantly, doing it for the culture, whether it's for the Hispanic culture, the African American culture, because at the same time we're all aligned kind of on the same path, just similar background stories. So when you think of overall Hispanic culture and the importance of like preserving it and promoting it more than ever, especially here in South Texas, Dr. Gonzalez, what would you tell somebody who is visiting, of course, Corpus Christi, Texas, visiting South Texas, and who wants to understand the Hispanic culture more from their own eyes?
And let me just kind of make a quick editing as far as you mentioned being the president of the Instituto de Cultura Hispánica, so the Hispanic Culture Institute.
Right.
My presidency after 3.5 years finally came to an end as of December 31st. So I'm an ex-president now, on a list of a long line of presidents.
Well, for those who are listening to the HFWB podcast series, basically, like Dr. Gonzalez alluded to, now he's a former president, and he basically made a wonderful contribution while he was president of ICH. But go ahead and continue, Dr. Gonzalez.
But as far as, someone from out of town,
right?
I think in itself here, Corpus has a lot of historical roots when it comes to Hispanic culture. Even from the name itself, Corpus Christi, it comes from that linkage of association with the church, association with with Spain, and the date that what this area was identified on was the day of Corpus Christi.
Right.
And so, I think a lot of what we do here is just part of being Hispanic. Mm-hmm. When it comes to that term, as being in the President Hispanic Culture Institute, terms evolve over time. Even the term Hispanic is something that has evolved over time. That was something that came about as a way to identify a particular ethnicity in groups here in the U.S. to get us counted in the census. But I've had some, as I told you, I've had some opportunities to get experiences outside of Texas, outside of the U.S., and definitely being part of the Hispanic Culture Institute, where we've represented people from over 23 different countries. Mm-hmm. You really get to know a lot of different Latin American and Igbo American cultures. And I can tell you, with many of those members, you ask them, what are you? They're going to tell you the country they're from. They're not going to say Hispanic. They're not going to say Latino. They're not going to use gender-neutral terms like Latinx either. They're going to tell you the country they're from.
Exactly.
And each one, like I said, each one of those has a very unique culture. And I think that's something that, as being part of, being the president, I got to experience that, learn that, because I'm constantly learning, and that's part of my life goal, is to never stop learning.
Exactly. Is there any culture specifically during your time that stood out to you the most, that made you realize, wow, this culture is really making an impact that's a lot of people aren't really noticing as much, so to speak?
I wouldn't say that this particular culture is making an impact more than other. What I say is what I'm most familiar with. Right. I said I'm from Corpus Christi, and probably the most dominant culture here is the Mexican culture and all the influences here within Corpus Christi. In fact, I had in my family alone, I have Hispanic heritage as part of the heritage. I have a lot of other things that are part of my heritage, but that's Hispanic. The Mexican heritage is part of it. Mm-hmm. And I think, like many of us, we when we look for our identity, we think, well, perhaps I identify as Mexican American.
Yeah.
But I had an opportunity, or life allowed me to live in Mexico for 6 years. Mm-hmm. And in my time there, I learned a few things. And I learned, the very first thing I always say I learned I'm not Mexican. It's a different culture.
Yeah.
It's different from what I grew up with. There are some similarities. And I can say it's different because if I look at it, it's the same thing with all these other Latin American countries. There's similarities, but they're different.
Yeah.
So mine is different too. I'm Texan. And that in itself does have its own culture.
Yes, it does.
And it's unique here in Corpus Christi as well. I think that's a part of what, if I would tell anybody is from out of town, is embrace the culture that you see here. It is unique of its own. The ocean is our friend. We gravitate to that. If you think about taquerias, they're all over the place here.
Yes, they are.
In fact, the very first one being here as well. And so that's part of us too, as part of that food culture of ours. I know it's not Mexican, it's Tex-Mex. It's unique of its own. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the other thing I said. I recognized that I was not Mexican. Being down there in Mexico, I just would do things differently. I'm just unique to its own. But at least while living there, I got to travel around. I got to experience, go to different museums. Mm-hmm. And I think what appealed to me most was the art world, and how the impact Mexican artists had on artists throughout the world. As you said, we mentioned, we met at a art show that I was helping put on.
Yes.
And I think part of me, I think that's an important thing. because of going back to that of, everyone hears about Frida Kahlo, they hear about Diego Rivera, they've become pop culture within themselves. But if you really go down the roots of it, you think about, in Detroit, do you think about having a mural of Diego Rivera in Detroit?
Oh, wow.
Not the first thing that pops in your mind, but there's one there. He's got murals in New York. He's got murals throughout the world. And these artists, they would hang out together and they would share the techniques and they'd share different ideas and styles. And if the way for me, coming from here, and here's me blending a little bit about my background as well, is that I'm from Corpus, grew up in pretty humble beginnings. I am the first person in my family to actually have graduated from college. Family members after me have, but I was the first.
You broke the mold, yes.
Yeah. And I didn't just break the mold; I broke it big because I did the bachelor's, the master's, and the PhD. So we did it big.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, and so that's for me, having those humble backgrounds and not really even having been exposed to the art world or to things within music beyond Tejano, things with sculpture, things with food, even food itself being an art form. All of that in roundabout became kind of an empowerment for me. This feeling that I'm in all of this, and there's people that look like me, and might not have the same culture, but we have similarities. And if they were capable to do these great things, why not me?
That's a great way to look at it. It's just a matter of just finding people who are like-minded individuals and who have similar and common backgrounds to where you could come together and be like, hey, I can follow in your footsteps, and like you just alluded to, if they can do it, why can't I? Is there's and within your journey, I mean, for those who don't know Dr. Xavier Gonzalez, to make sure I have this correct, you are currently, at this moment, the Director of the Mental Health Services for Nueces County here at this very moment, for our listeners.
Director of Mental Health Programs.
Mental Health. Yes, sir. And speaking of those mental health programs, I know you're definitely a big advocate for mental health, and that's definitely needed more than ever, especially going into 2023 and stuff, to kind of help people reset their mind, explore it to where they can restore it and stuff like that. What does mental health and the importance of it, as far as people being aware of it, mean to you? And is there a certain story that sticks out to you to where it's like, okay, I need to make an impact and make a difference and make sure people are fully aware of the importance of mental health?
Yes. Where I said, having humble beginnings too. I graduated from my bachelor's here from A&M Corpus. I worked the whole time I was in my undergrad. Worked the whole time I was in the master's. But one of the jobs I had for a few years was as a mental health technician in the county psych. So I worked in Memorial on the 7th floor in the basement. And that gave me some chances to engage with individuals who are in their most dire need for mental health services. And getting at least a perspective of how the mental health services actually work. And so that being said too, there's a lot of needs for mental health services, in particular here in Nueces County. And my role is not that I'm not a counselor, so I don't give counsel. I'm a program manager. So basically looking at all the programs that are out there and seeing, making sure that there's no barriers towards access. That's the key right there. Making sure that everyone has access to care.
Exactly.
And so I say that as far as you ask, name one story. What I'm going to refer to is that I've also been a professor at A&M Corpus. I still teach one class a semester. But in one class that I do teach is medical humanities. And in that, for a while, one of the things that I talked about the most was this term eugenics. Basically, it was a term that kind of evolved and grew some strength along the way around when we started getting more information about heredity, and you hear about Charles Darwin and all those other individuals. But that also led to some key movements in the legal system. And one of those is Buck versus Bell. And in that, basically, you have a woman whose last name is Buck, who comes from a family that had been labeled by the term feeble-minded. What would you how would you describe that? But basically, in retrospect, it was generational poverty, and because of that generational poverty, they did not pursue education. Perhaps did not have the influence to continue to pursue education because there wasn't a need for it, based on what people did.
Right.
And so, but because of that and the ideology that these individuals had that were not the same as those that came from more socially inept or capable, they labeled them as feeble-minded, and decided that the best place for these individuals, because they were just having children without regard, was to put them inside an asylum and try to get them treatment for their feeble-mindedness. And so what Buck and Bell is basically a story about a woman who was going to be forced to be sterilized.
Oh, wow.
And so there's two different levels there. The first level is, of course, women's rights and protecting whether they can have children or not. But the level where I talk about is the fact that this term feeble-minded, someone doesn't have the mental capabilities to function well in society, so let's lock them up. And I would say that kind of brought this idea of that these mental institutions taking away someone's right to health, mental health, because someone said so.
Yeah.
Now, not to disregard that, there are individuals who are born, in some cases, born with the need mental health care. But in this case, here's where the lines kind of starts blurring. And I think that's where programs have to be very strong. And you have to have those individuals along the way who are looking at things from outside the box to make sure that we're not just following the status quo. And I've always been an outside the box person, outside the box thinker. And always looking at things as far as, when someone says we're providing a service, what does that actually mean? And that goes back to then, as you mentioned, me getting to the point of actually having a PhD and attaining the highest level of education that I could possibly obtain. That was, that was a challenge in itself. But when I think of mental health and think of a story that impacts me and it makes me want to really make sure I look at what's going on clearly, that's one of those stories. The other is kind of just from me and my background, just over the years, when it comes to services for those who have perhaps maybe economically a disadvantage or come from underserved populations.
Right. Yes, and that's important, just bringing these necessary programs to these underserved populations, because, and especially in those areas within itself, I feel like that's where the resources and the access can be very limited, and the fact that you're willing to think outside the box to try to put these programs into place so, like you said, could have access to the care and stuff. I feel like that is tremendous, and I feel like that is that's what leaders do. That they do groundbreaking stuff, and they're not afraid to break the barrier big, as you alluded to earlier, Dr. Gonzalez. And overall, that's what makes you, from what I can tell based on the conversations we had, a great leader and your own person in its own right. And I feel like that's what we need more of in today's society, especially for those who are listening to the HFWB podcast series. When it comes to leadership, Dr. Gonzalez, what is your personal definition of it, and what makes a leader stand out in your eyes?
For me, I personally follow individuals who are willing to get dirty, who are willing to demonstrate that they're willing to do things too. And so because that's who I follow, that's how I try to do myself. I don't ask anybody to do anything that I wouldn't do.
Yeah.
Or that's plain and simple. I know I've been part of these leadership programs where they do training, and I've been part of those who develop them. And I know that there's classes on leadership. And I always tell them every single time when they ask me to be part of these programs, I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't read leadership books. I just do it. I don't know the fancy terms. It's just, it's just done. And if people want to follow me, then that's what you call being a leader, that people, when they follow you, it just happened.
No, that's the exact same approach I have. I don't want to talk about it or read about it somewhere. I'd rather just get down and dirty and just do it. And if, like you said, Dr. Gonzalez, if people follow me, great. If not, hey, I know I'm doing something that is right within me, and that will make the best contribution to the world within itself. And I love that about you, Dr. Gonzalez, based on what you just said. And I feel like that's what people need to do more of, because I feel like that's what defines a leader at its truest potential, without question. Now, Dr. Gonzalez, we're getting to the point of the podcast where I'm basically going to ask you like a list of questions, in which I ask everybody who comes onto the podcast to kind of give people a little bit more about you and stuff like that, and put you on the spot on a couple of questions here. So a couple of thinkers. First question I have for you is this. What is the first thing you do or think of every single day that you wake up?
Think about my kids. Well, that's it. I wake up, I have my son next to me. That's the number one thing.
No, and that's the best answer you can give, especially for those who are parents. Always make sure you have your kids on mind, because you'd be surprised on how many parents that don't have their kids on their mind, and that's a shame within itself, and a whole nother story for a whole nother day. My next question, Dr. Gonzalez, when it comes to health and wealth, what is your personal definition in your own eyes?
Health is key. People build wealth so they can have health. That's very straightforward. It's like, if you can look at that even across the board, even from governmental stances. Why do we build roads? Well, we build roads so we can have access. Because better access we have allows us to get to things we need. We can get food. We can get away from dangers. We can have a better transportation system. But in the end, all that is to keep us healthy.
That's a straightforward and simple answer right there, Dr. Gonzalez. And that's probably one of the best answers I've actually heard to that question. And that's the truth. And that just gets right down to it. I love it. Now, I understand that you're probably one of the busiest men that I know, Dr. Gonzalez. And whenever you're not doing everything that you're currently doing on a regular day-by-day basis, what are some of the favorite things you like to do that the people may not know that you love to do, as far as like hobbies and stuff?
My hobbies have evolved over time. Right now, the key, and I won't even call it a hobby, it's just what I do. I make sure that my weekends are closed to work, and the time gets dedicated to family. And so that can mean getting up, making breakfast, and then going to an event, or just walking somewhere, going to the park. That's what I do as far as, and I wouldn't call it free time. That's the time that's dedicated to family. When I'm not working. If I like to swim, I like to, and I swim recreationally. I work out recreationally. I like walking and hiking. I like just being out in the open air, and traveling. That allows that too sometimes, just to go somewhere new as I mentioned to you earlier, I am a constant learner. So
Right.
when you want to say it's a hobby to just be learning, but that's what I like to do too.
No, and I can second that, Dr. Gonzalez, because I don't look at learning as a hobby. I look at it as a passion and a way of life for life. Because when you're constantly learning, you're constantly growing and you're constantly evolving. And the moment you stop learning is the moment you stop growing and you stay in this stagnant position, and then you wonder why you're not getting anywhere in life. So I agree with you 100% as far as never stop learning and always finding ways where you can get better, because that's pretty much what learning is all about, finding ways you can get better and improve, most importantly. We're going to do a little bit of either or on here, Dr. Gonzalez, just to kind of get you on your toes, to help you think a little bit on these questions. My first question on this one is, would you rather have respect or loyalty?
Would I rather have respect or loyalty?
Right.
Well, if I have loyalty, then you're showing me respect.
That's a great point. I can't even deny that. That's a great answer there.
It goes back to that too. What I told you is that,
yeah,
I will follow those who demonstrate. And so I demonstrate things that I would do too, and I think that develops the most respect, and that gets loyalty, because people know that you're gonna go out there and do it. They'll be loyal.
You hit the nail right on the head, Dr. Gonzalez, because that's the exact way I usually think about things mostly every single day myself. So I could second that as well. My next question is an interesting one. If you had to choose, would you rather live in space or live in the ocean?
Live in space or live in the ocean. It's the exact same thing. It's an openness. I've been always a water guy, so I'd be in the ocean.
That's a great answer. Great answer. Here's an interesting one. Would you rather be famous and poor or anonymous and rich?
Famous and poor, anonymous and rich. Again, I've had many of opportunities over time. And one of them is that I met a very rich individual.
Right.
Who was fairly anonymous. And he got asked the question, why are you doing all these things to help people when you really don't have to? You've got all this money. You can be going out traveling the world and doing all kinds of things. So what was the point of getting all that money if I wasn't going to use it to help people? Famous, right now I'd say I don't really have fame, and I'm not really rich. Well, not rich at all. I wouldn't call myself poor either. I'm just right.
Just right in the middle.
I just like helping people. That's what I've been drawn to. That's very simplistic, but I really don't have a preference for either.
Yeah.
Even if I was rich, I would probably still be doing the same things. Maybe just
fair.
Travel a little bit farther.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I wouldn't be doing much different. And if I was poor, if I had less money and I have lived poor, I still travel. It doesn't take that much to catch a bus to go just somewhere else.
Yeah, that's what
it's
we
all
still
about
have the Greyhound buses.
Experiencing something different.
No, that's a very interesting perspective, and I admire that tremendously. And speaking of traveling, and I know you mentioned, Dr. Gonzalez, that you're into, of course, the foods from the different culture. I'm going to add a little bit of a twist to this one. Would you rather have unlimited free meals at any of the restaurants that you went to as far as your favorite from all the food experiences, or would you rather have unlimited first-class tickets to travel anywhere you want to travel?
I would go with the unlimited first-class tickets to travel anywhere.
I don't know why.
It doesn't have to be first class. It can be just a regular coach, but those unlimited
I don't know why, Dr. Gonzalez. I had a feeling you were going to say that because, like you alluded to, your love to travel and to be able to explore the world and be able to meet all these different people and stuff. So that doesn't really surprise me based on everything we've been talking about. But my last question, Dr. Gonzalez, is a very interesting one. If you had the opportunity, right, to go back in time and talk to yourself 10 years ago, what would you tell yourself? And at the same time, where do you see yourself personally within the next 10 years? and at the same time, just the overall state of mental health?
If I could go back in time and talk to myself 10 years ago, I wouldn't say anything. I just pat myself on the back, give myself a hug, and that's it. Why?
Oh, that's a great answer, actually. That's the first time I've heard anybody say that. That's a great answer, though.
And I'll tell you why, though. I've had some tribulations along the way.
Right.
But I've learned, age lets you be thankful for those tribulations, because without that, there's just things that would not exist.
Right.
I mentioned my kids. My kids wouldn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm at, the way I think, the way I do things wouldn't exist. So that's basically it. Just give myself that hug that everybody needs every once in a while. Just keep on going. Things will work themselves out. Where do I see myself in the future? I'm always trying to improve myself, improve what I'm doing. So, working at a higher level. But still doing within the same compounds of continuing trying to figure out ways to make sure that everybody has access to their needs, particularly when it comes to health.
That's wonderful, and I believe you're going to continue to do that because you're already doing a fabulous job at it already, and I expect that to continue based on the work that you put in, based off the overall years of experience you brought to everything that you're currently doing, Dr. Gonzalez. Now, for everybody who wants to get a hold of you and contact you, where can they do that exactly?
My email is probably going to be the most ideal, and just because there's people that would want to get a hold of me for various things. I'd share two of my emails. I have my personal email, which is pretty easy. It's Gonzalez with an S at the end, .xavier@gmail.com. If it has to do anything with mental health, feel free to reach out to my office email, which is xavier.gonzalez at noasisco.com.
Well said. And yes, if you've learned anything from listening to this episode of the HFWB podcast series from myself and Dr. Gonzalez, it's kind of simple. Never stop learning, and most importantly, it doesn't matter what race it is. We're all the human race. We need to continue to evolve. We need to continue to learn and grow and explore different things and just get to the point where, hey, if we're comfortable, get ourselves uncomfortable. That way we can continue to grow within that. With that being said, Dr. Gonzalez, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to bless us with an appearance on the HFWB podcast series. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Clifton. I appreciate it.
No, of course, and for everyone who's listening to the HFWB podcast series, this is your host, Clifton Pope, and I encourage everyone to stay healthy, wealthy, and blessed. And until next time, everybody, peace and love.
Take care.